The James Bond series 100% has a continuity. I've gotten many comments on my James Bond videos asserting that the James Bond series does not have a continuity and that all the Bond actors are actually playing different men who are under the code name James Bond. James Bond isn't a code name. I have made a video about that in the past, but in this video I'm going to go into even more exacting detail explaining why that is and showing that there is in fact a continuity in the James Bond series. I am specifically going to be talking about the first James Bond continuity, which is the first 5 actors. The Daniel Craig era is its own separate continuity. Sean Connery here is the OG James Bond, and he was in the first 5 James Bond movies. For the 6th movie, after Connery resigned from the role, he was replaced by George Lazenby, who was only in 1 James Bond film. That movie was On Her Majesty's Secret Service from 1969. There's one scene in this movie where Bond is cleaning out his desk at MI6, and as he's cleaning it out, he takes out all these different items that were gathered during the events of the previous 5 movies. That directly ties Lazenby's Bond to Connery's Bond. They're the same guy. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is also the movie where Bond gets married to this woman, Contessa Teresa di Vincenzo, aka Tracy. This movie ends with James Bond marrying Tracy and them driving off, but just as it looks like they're about to live happily ever after, she gets murdered by the villain. Like I said, Lazenby was a one-and-done James Bond, and after him, Connery actually came back for one more movie before leaving the series for good. Sean Connery was then replaced by Roger Moore. Roger Moore's 3rd Bond movie, The Spy Who Loved Me, is the first time the series addresses the death of Tracy. There's a scene where Bond rendezvous with a Soviet Secret Service agent named Anya Amasova, and this lady has read his file. As she's rattling off all this information about Bond to show him that she knows who he is, she mentions that his wife was killed. This makes him react somewhat defensively, and he says, "Okay, you've made your point." The Roger Moore era references Tracy's death again in 1981's For Your Eyes Only. During the pre-title sequence, Bond arrives at this cemetery holding flowers, and he lays them on the grave of his late wife, and on the headstone, you actually see her name, Teresa Bond. Roger Moore was succeeded by Timothy Dalton, and his brief time as James Bond also brings up the memory of Tracy's death. Early in his 2nd and final James Bond movie, License to Kill, Bond is departing the wedding of his friend from the CIA, Felix Leiter. The movie then indirectly references Tracy's death when Leiter solemnly tells his new wife that James Bond was married once before. The last James Bond of the original timeline is Pierce Brosnan, and his era also obliquely references the death of Tracy. This happens in Pierce Brosnan's 3rd Bond movie, The World Is Not Enough from 1999. There's a scene where Bond is speaking with who we think is the Bond girl, Elektra King, and she asks him, "Have you ever lost a loved one, Mr. Bond?" Bond doesn't answer, and there's just a pregnant pause because it's clearly a painful subject for him. One could argue that that's not proof that the movie is referencing Tracy's death, but it really is. In The World Is Not Enough, Elektra King, who you initially think is the Bond girl, turns out to be the main villain of the movie. Barbara Broccoli said of the character Elektra King that in Elektra, Bond thinks he's found Tracy, but he's really found Blofeld. The implication being that this Brosnan Bond movie ties back to the Lazenby Bond movie, which ties all the way back to the beginning, to Connery's Bond movies. So there you have it. The James Bond movies, 100%, are connected.